The Perfect Crime. On a dark night in London, Inspector Edward Collins sat in his office, pondering over a mysterious case that defied explanation. Collins, a man in his mid-50s, was an expert in solving impossible crimes. Having worked in the criminal investigation department for over 30 years, he had built an unrivaled reputation. However, he was a lonely man, having dedicated his life to solving intricate mysteries at the expense of his personal life. His weary eyes carried the weight of countless horrors he had witnessed, yet his passion for uncovering the truth remained unshaken. The victim, billionaire Richard Hastings, was a 70-year-old business tycoon who had amassed a fortune in real estate and major projects. Despite his immense wealth, he was far from happy. A terminal illness was slowly consuming him, and as he looked around at those closest to him, he saw only greed and selfishness lurking like shadows. His family life was a farce, a theatrical performance where everyone played their part, all waiting for his inevitable fall. On the day before his death, Richard decided to grant himself one last day of true freedom, living without concern for his illness or impending demise. He woke up earlier than usual, stared at his tired reflection in the mirror, and slowly took his medication. He had never been diligent about it, believing it prolonged his suffering rather than saving him. He started his day with chocolate ice cream, a childhood favorite, even though it was unsuitable for his age or health. He sat in a small cafe he used to visit in his youth, ignoring the puzzled glances around him. Next, he went to his favorite Italian restaurant, a place he had frequented for years, and sat in his usual corner. He ordered his beloved lasagna and a glass of wine, despite his doctor's strict prohibition. He wanted to savor life as he had once known it, even if just for a day. After lunch, he visited the cinema, a place he had not entered in years. He chose an old black and white film, reminiscent of those he had watched with his late father. He sat in the last row, lost in memories rather than the movie itself. That evening, he drove to the beach, where he sat on the cold sand, watching the waves. A rare sense of tranquility washed over him as his thoughts revolved around his final decision. He recalled moments of success, failure, betrayal, and lingering regrets. He realized that everyone was merely waiting for his death, but he had decided to end things on his own terms. The suspects. 1. Victoria Hastings, his wife. She was out of town, but was she truly absent, or had her influence reached further than anyone suspected? 2. George Miller, his business partner. Could he have orchestrated the murder to seize full control? 3. Henry Wilson, his personal servant, the last person to see him alive. Was his loyalty strong enough to prevent him from committing murder? 4. Michael Hastings, his son, drowning in debt. Could he have lost patience and taken matters into his own hands? Collins began his investigation, but with every step, the mystery deepened. Something was amiss. The autopsy report revealed an unsettling detail. There was no blood around the body. If he had been stabbed, where was the blood? Upon reinvestigating the mansion, Collins discovered a faint bloodstain beneath the office rug, as if someone had carefully cleaned it. A quick chemical analysis revealed traces of a clotting agent commonly used in hospitals to stop bleeding. A shiver ran down Collins's spine. Hastings was not merely a victim, he was the perpetrator of his own demise. Days before his death, Hastings had sat in his office, staring into the darkness as if confronting his inevitable fate. He knew his end was near, but he refused to be just another corpse, buried while his heirs divided his fortune without consequence. So he devised the perfect crime. That night, he took a knife and carefully positioned the wound so it would appear as though he had been murdered. What he did not anticipate was his loyal servant Henry's desperate attempt to save him. When Henry found his master bleeding out, he could not stand idly by. In a frantic effort, he tried to save him, but to no avail. Staring at the lifeless body of the man he had served all his life, Henry made a fateful decision. he would erase any evidence that this had been a suicide, preserving his master's powerful image even in death. When Collins uncovered the truth, chaos erupted in the room. Just as silence fell, Hastings' lawyer entered and delivered the final revelation. Richard Hastings had left his entire fortune to his personal servant, Henry Wilson, as the only person who had cared for him without expecting anything in return. However, there was one condition: Henry was required to pay off all of Michael's debts. The room fell into stunned silence as Henry stood speechless. The man he had served his whole life had given him everything, not just as a reward, but as a final, cruel message to his greedy family. After the investigation, Collins sat in his office, lost in thought. There had been no conventional murderer, no crime as he had known it. Just a man who orchestrated his own end, punishing everyone even beyond the grave. Victoria Hastings felt more anger than grief, as if she had been deceived at the last moment. She had believed she would inherit a fortune, but now she had nothing. Michael collapsed, not in sorrow, but in fury. How could a man be so ruthless even in death? How could he rob him of the wealth he thought would save him? As for George Miller, he remained silent, realizing that Hastings, even in death, had been far smarter than him. With a weary smile, Collins wrote in his report, "Sometimes, the most horrific crimes are those where there is no murderer, only a victim who punishes everyone, even from beyond the grave."